So you want to unpack this whole GTA thing. You're not alone. It's been a cultural juggernaut for, what, like 3 decades? It feels like everyone's played it, debated it, seen it parodied. But getting to the core of why it matters, that's the mission here today. And luckily, you sent over this article that seems like it gets into all the good stuff, from the early days right up to GTA Online.
You've hit the nail on the head. I mean, how does a series that starts with you stealing pixelated cars from a bird's eye view turn into, well, this? It's a fascinating evolution, and not just for games, but for how we tell stories, how we engage with online worlds, the whole package.
All right, let's go all the way back. 1997, the original Grand Theft Auto. This was before the 3D open worlds that people associate with the series now, wasn't it?
It was top-down perspective, pretty basic graphics. But even then, DMA Design, who'd later become Rockstar North, were onto something different. They gave you the city and said, go nuts. You could complete missions, sure, but how you did it was up to you. The chaos, the freedom, it was a taste of what open-world games could be.
So even in its simplest form, that sandbox element, that feeling of I can do whatever I want, was baked in from the start.
Exactly. And that set the stage for what came next. When Grand Theft Auto III arrived in 2001, it was a watershed moment, not just for the series, but for the entire gaming landscape.
This was the big jump to 3D, right? Liberty City, the whole 9 yards. I remember everyone losing their minds over it. But what was it about that shift that was so revolutionary?
Imagine suddenly being in that world instead of just looking down on it. Suddenly, it wasn't just about moving a sprite around. You were experiencing Liberty City as a living, breathing place with scale, with atmosphere. And that third-person perspective, it did something really interesting. It made you feel like you were part of the action, like you were the one calling the shots.
And the article talks about how GTA 3 wasn't just a visual upgrade. They were pushing AI forward, giving you way more vehicles, making the world feel dynamic. It was a huge leap in immersion.
Totally. It was like they were saying, okay, we've got the open world, now let's make it truly believable. The way pedestrians reacted, the variety of cars, even little details like the day-night cycle. It was a whole new level of sophistication, and it set the standard for open-world games going forward.
So they nailed the formula with GTA 3, but the series doesn't stop there. We get GTA 4 in 2008, GTA V in 2013, each one pushing things further. What were the big gameplay advancements in those later titles?
GTA 4 was a refinement of everything that worked in 3. More detail, more realism, thanks to the new Rage engine. It really nailed that feeling of weight and consequence in a way previous games hadn't. Combat, for example, went from a bit clunky to a more tactical, cover-based system. You felt the impact of each bullet.
You were mentioning the physics engine earlier. I remember feeling that change in GTA 4. Driving felt different, more grounded. Even walking around felt more natural.
Exactly. And then GTA V comes along, taking it to a whole new level. The map was enormous, ridiculously detailed, and the physics were even more refined. But the real game changer, literally, was the 3 protagonist system: Michael, Franklin, Trevor. You were experiencing the story and the world through 3 very distinct lenses.
And the article argues that this character switching mechanic wasn't just a gimmick, it fundamentally changed how the story was told. Why was that so effective?
It allowed for a depth of storytelling that we hadn't really seen in games before. You got to see the same events, the same world from multiple perspectives, and those perspectives were often clashing. You had Michael, the retired criminal, trying to go straight, then Franklin, the up-and-comer caught in the middle, and of course Trevor. Well, Trevor's Trevor.
Chaos incarnate. And on top of all that, you've got GTA Online launching in 2013. Suddenly, it's not just about your story in this open world, it's about sharing it with others, making your own mayhem.
Yeah, and that's been huge for the series' longevity. That constant stream of updates, new missions, new ways to play with friends. It's kept GTA V relevant for over a decade, which is practically unheard of in this industry.
It's wild to think it's still going strong. But let's rewind a bit. The article points out how the narratives in GTA weren't always so complex. It argues that GTA 3, even with its silent protagonist, was a turning point in how the series approached storytelling.
Right. Before that, it was mostly about completing missions, racking up points. GTA 3 started to weave a more intricate narrative, even without giving Claude a voice. It tapped into these classic themes of betrayal, revenge, power struggles. It gave you a reason to care about what was happening beyond just the next objective.
And then you have Vice City and San Andreas building on that foundation, 2 games that are still beloved for their stories and characters.
Vice City was pure 80s nostalgia. It was Scarface, it was Miami Vice, but with this tongue-in-cheek humor that made it distinctly GTA. And then San Andreas took it even further. It tackled social issues, gang violence, political corruption. It was a sprawling epic that felt truly ambitious for its time.
And both of those games had memorable protagonists. Tommy Vercetti and CJ were larger-than-life figures, but they also had depth, flaws, motivations that made you root for them.
Exactly. And that trend continued with GTA IV and V. Nico Bellic was this tragic figure, chasing the American dream but constantly dragged down by his past. And as we discussed, GTA V gave you three protagonists to connect with, each with their own struggles and triumphs.
It feels like that constant push for better storytelling has been key to the series' success. It's not just about the open world anymore, it's about the characters you meet, the stories you experience within that world. But none of that would be possible without the technology to back it up. The article highlights the leap to 3D with GTA 3, but what were some of the other big technological advancements that helped make these worlds feel real?
Well, as we touched on earlier, the introduction of the Rage engine with GTA 4V was huge. The level of detail they were able to achieve in Liberty City was remarkable for the time. You had realistic lighting, weather effects that actually impacted gameplay, and the Euphoria animation system, that was a game changer.
I remember reading about Euphoria back then. It was all about making character movement more natural, more lifelike.
Right. Suddenly, characters weren't just stiffly animating, they were stumbling, reacting to impacts, bracing themselves when they fell. It added this layer of believability that went beyond just graphical fidelity. It was about making the characters feel like they inhabited the world, not just existed on top of it.
It's those little details, that attention to realism, that can really immerse you. And GTA V just pushed things even further, right? San Andreas was massive, and even more detailed than Liberty City had been.
Oh, absolutely. San Andreas was an incredible technical achievement. The variety of environments, the sheer scale of it all, they really pushed the Rage engine to its limits. Plus, they continued to refine the AI, not just for the human characters, but for the wildlife as well. You could be driving through the wilderness and see a deer react naturally to your car, even little things like birds taking flight when you approached.
It's that kind of commitment to detail that makes a world feel lived in, believable. And they even introduced first-person mode for the next-gen versions of GTA V, didn't they?
They did. And that was another layer of immersion. You were no longer just controlling this character from behind, you were seeing the world through their eyes.
Yeah.
It completely changed how you experienced everything, from driving to combat to simply walking around and taking in the sights.
And all this technological progress wasn't just for the single-player experience. It allowed for the creation of GTA Online, this constantly evolving, persistent world where players could interact and create their own stories.
And the technology behind GTA Online is constantly evolving as well. The improvements in online infrastructure, cloud-based systems, that's what allows them to keep adding new content, new features, keep millions of players engaged all these years later.
Speaking of keeping people engaged, we can't really talk about GTA without addressing the elephant in the room, the controversies that have surrounded the series since day one. The article delves into this pretty deeply, starting with the issue of violence.
It's impossible to ignore. From the very first game, GTA has pushed boundaries, and that's often meant depicting violence in a very graphic way, and it sparked debates that continue to this day. Does this kind of violence desensitize players? Does it lead to real-world aggression? These are questions that have been studied, debated, argued about for decades.
The article mentions cases where real-world crimes were linked, at least in the media, to playing GTA. That kind of attention, it's understandable that people would be concerned.
Absolutely. When something tragic happens, it's natural to look for explanations, and video games have often been an easy target. And because GTA is so popular, so visible, it's been at the center of those discussions time and time again. The problem is finding a direct, causal link between playing a game and committing a violent act. It's very difficult to prove scientifically.
The article points out that the research on this is mixed. Some studies suggest there might be a correlation, but many others find no direct causal link. It's a complex issue, and probably not one with an easy answer.
Exactly. It's not as simple as saying playing violent games makes people violent. There are so many other factors at play: social environment, mental health, individual personality. Trying to isolate the impact of one form of media is incredibly difficult.
And Rockstar, to their credit, has always maintained that their games are satirical, that the violence is over the top, and meant to critique, not endorse.
Right. They've argued that it's about holding a mirror up to society, showing the absurdity, the hypocrisy, and I think there's some truth to that. GTA has never shied away from pushing buttons, from making people uncomfortable, and that's part of what makes it so compelling.
But even if it's satire, doesn't mean everyone's going to get it. or that it's going to be interpreted the same way by everyone?
Of course. And that's where the controversy comes in. Humor is subjective, satire can be misinterpreted, and when you're dealing with sensitive topics like violence, there are bound to be strong reactions.
Yeah, the controversies surrounding GTA go beyond just the violence, don't they? The article also talks about the criticism the series has faced for its portrayal of women and minorities.
That's another important aspect to consider. GTA, especially in its earlier iterations, was often guilty of relying on stereotypes, of portraying women primarily as either eye candy or damsels in distress. And certain minority groups were often depicted in ways that reinforced harmful tropes, which understandably led to a lot of backlash.
The article mentions the portrayal of gang culture in games like San Andreas and GTA V as being particularly problematic. It raised questions about whether these portrayals were accurate reflections of reality or simply perpetuating harmful stereotypes.
Right. And that gets into a really thorny issue. When does representation cross the line into harmful stereotyping? It's a conversation that's been happening across all forms of media, not just games. And it's something that game developers are becoming more conscious of, thinking more critically about how they represent different groups in their games.
But there's also the argument that some of those portrayals, even if they're exaggerated, are meant to be social commentary, to critique the very stereotypes they're accused of perpetuating.
That's the defense Rockstar has often used, and there's definitely a case to be made for it. Satire often relies on exaggeration, on taking things to an extreme to make a point. But the question is, does everyone understand that intent? Or are those portrayals simply reinforcing the harmful stereotypes they're supposedly critiquing?
It's a tough one. And the controversies surrounding GTA haven't just led to heated debates, they've also had real-world consequences with calls for bans, legal challenges, all sorts of things.
Absolutely. GTA has been banned or censored in several countries, and it's been at the center of legal battles over free speech and the regulation of video game content. In the US, it even went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ultimately ruled in favor of video games being protected under the First Amendment.
So a landmark case for the entire industry.
Mm.
But even though the courts have largely sided with Rockstar, the controversy surrounding GTA has definitely contributed to the ongoing conversation about responsible game development, about the ethical considerations that come with creating content that can be so impactful.
It's forced the industry to grapple with some tough questions. What are our responsibilities as creators? How do we balance artistic freedom with the potential impact of our work? These are conversations that continue to this day, and GTA has been a major catalyst for them.
So we've covered the development, the gameplay, the stories, the tech, the controversies. Now let's talk about the cultural impact, because GTA hasn't just influenced gaming, it's seeped into music, movies, even academic discourse. The article starts with music, and for good reason. GTA soundtracks are legendary.
It's no accident. Rockstar has always understood the power of music to create atmosphere, to immerse you in a world. They meticulously curate these soundtracks, blending different genres, different eras. It's part of what makes each GTA game feel so unique.
And it's not just the background music. The in-game radio stations are iconic, the talk shows, the commercials, the DJs. It's all part of creating this believable satirical world.
Right, it's world building through sound. They're not just giving you a playlist, they're creating a sonic landscape that reflects the themes, the humor, the overall vibe of the game, and it works brilliantly.
I mean, think about Vice City. That 80s soundtrack, it's inseparable from the game itself. It is Vice City.
Exactly. And the article makes a great point about how those soundtracks have had an impact beyond the games themselves. They've introduced people to new artists, repopularized old tracks. It's become this cultural phenomenon in its own right.
They've even had major artists like Dr. Dre creating original music specifically for GTA Online. That's a testament to how influential the series has become, how it can bridge the gap between gaming and other forms of entertainment.
Absolutely. And it's not just music. The article talks about how GTA's style, its themes, have influenced film and television as well.
Yeah, you can see it in everything from gritty crime dramas like Breaking Bad to action flicks like Drive, and even animated shows like South Park have done GTA parodies.
Right. It's become part of the cultural lexicon, a shorthand for a certain kind of over-the-top action, dark humor, and social commentary. And even beyond popular media, GTA has become a subject of serious academic study. There are books and articles analyzing its themes, its cultural impact, its place in the history of interactive entertainment.
Which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. It started as this somewhat niche, controversial video game, And now it's being studied in universities.
It's a testament to the power of games as a storytelling medium, as a cultural force. GTA has sparked conversations, pushed boundaries, and made people think in ways that few other games have.
And let's not forget about the online community aspect. GTA Online has been a phenomenon in its own right, creating these massive, persistent worlds where players can interact, collaborate, compete, and even roleplay.
GTA Online is a fascinating case study in how games can foster social interaction and community building. You have these groups, these crews, forming to tackle heists together to build businesses. It's a microcosm of real-world social dynamics, but within this over-the-top virtual world.
And then you have the role-playing servers, where people are creating their own characters, their own narratives, essentially telling their own stories within the GTA universe. It's a whole other level of engagement.
And it speaks to the power of games as a platform for creativity and self-expression. GTA Online gives you the tools, the setting, and then it steps back and lets the players run wild. It's become this incredibly dynamic, ever-evolving space, which is a big part of why it's remained so popular for so long.
So looking back at the whole journey from those pixelated beginnings to this global phenomenon, it's pretty clear that GTA has left an undeniable mark on gaming and on culture as a whole.
No doubt about it. We've seen how it's evolved, how it's challenged conventions, how it's sparked both adoration and outrage. And through it all, it's remained relevant, engaging, and thought-provoking. It's a fascinating story, and one that's still being written.
Which brings up a final question, one for our listeners to ponder. What does GTA's enduring popularity say about us, about our fascination with this world, with these characters, with the freedom to explore our darker impulses in a virtual space? It's something to think about.
It certainly is. And as technology continues to evolve, as games become even more immersive and interconnected, it'll be interesting to see how GTA continues to push boundaries and shape the cultural landscape in the years to come.